everyone. Welcome back to the Undead Talk podcast. Today we are going to be discussing The Walking Dead Season 2, Episodes 4 through 6. And my dad is here to join me. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, everybody.
So these are, I think, some pretty solid episodes, especially Episodes 5 and 6. There was a lot of character development and a lot of really good moments with the characters. Not as much action, but in Episode 6 we get some action. So overall, do you like these 3 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really cool themes running through these episodes that I'm looking forward to chatting with you about. I like where this is headed. This is these are some good episodes, especially 5 and 6.
Yeah. So we have Season 2, Episode 4, called Cherokee Rose. And the Netflix summary says, Rick negotiates with Herschel to let the group stay on the farm while the others contend with an unusual threat, and Glenn goes on a mission. So the episode kicks off with the group, and they're all arriving at the Herschel farm, and it's clear that this is going to kind of be where they're settling for most likely the rest of the season. Like, this is the place, which I'm not upset about. I think there's a lot of potential for interesting stuff to go down at the farm. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can these two groups become one? This place is a safe place, right? Mm-hmm. It's safer than anything than Rick and crew have experienced. It's definitely a family, and we see that kind of in Otis's funeral. We see the family element of Herschel's group, and can these two groups integrate? Yeah, but it's interesting though with these two groups. Herschel has kind of a rule on his farm with no guns, and so that creates some tension.
Yeah, because pretty much they all believe, you need guns because there's the huge threat of walkers out there, and that's like the only way you can defend yourself is with weapons.
Yeah, so we have a conflict now.
Yeah,
a tension between the two groups, and so Rick and crew somewhat, sit down their guns at Herschel's request.
Yes. So we have Otis's funeral, and you have just Shane, who you can just see the guilt on his face. He's not trying to hide it. He is trying to hide it, but we can clearly see as the audience, because we know more than the characters do. It's one of those special cases. So I thought the actor did a pretty good job at keeping it together, the character keeping it together during it, and it was, I think, pretty convincing to the average person that there wouldn't be any suspicious going on, but Dale sees right through it, and that comes up later on in episode 6. But yeah, I thought that was a really good scene to show the complex emotions from Shane, and I think the actor continues to do a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I think his acting is the highlight, in my opinion, of season 1 and 2, and I love him in other things outside of The Walking Dead. But Shane's character does a great job here. Yeah. And you can see he's unraveling. Mm-hmm. I mean, the character as a human being is unraveling. We live with lies, we live with secrets, and it kills us from the inside out. And that's what's happening in Shane's life, as well as some other characters, as we'll see in episode 6.
Yeah. So Rick, he lies to Carl about Sophia. It's a minor thing, but I wanted to bring it up because later on, it seemed I had a suspicion about Carl and where he might be headed, and I feel this kind of contributes it because he's been through so much trauma that getting lied to about his best friend's condition doesn't help any, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I feel that's just another contributor to everything that he's been through.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you there. We see Carl knowing that his dad lied to him.
Yeah.
He knows. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. It hurts. It's another wound. And, he has physical wounds, and now he has these emotional, relational wounds with his dad lying to him.
Yeah. And sure, Rick just didn't want him to know, but it's a tough situation, but he definitely should not have lied to him.
Right.
So then we have this scene where there's a zombie in the well, and it's contaminating the water. Well, they say it's actually not, but if it gets broken apart, I guess, then it will, even though I feel it's probably already ruined the water, just it being there. But pretty much they decide that they're going to lower Glenn in as bait to get the walker out. And this is probably one like the dumbest thing that's happened on this show so far. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, they spend a lot of time on this whole well scene, getting the zombie out of the well. And Glenn does almost die here. And I think this is more about Glenn and what the group thinks of Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the, what would you say? Not scapegoat, but they use him for
Yeah.
their own needs, right? We'll send Glenn down there. And I think this is more about the group's treatment of Glenn
Mm-hmm.
than it is the zombie in the well.
Yeah, and this comes back up in episode 6, how they treat Glenn. But I thought it was the scene itself was like cool, like filmed and shot. But like I thought it was kind of for like the main action of the episode. I thought it was kind of underwhelming.
Yeah, agreed.
And they spent so much time on it, and it was like such a dumb plan. Like you knew it was going to go south.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah.
And
I think it was more about Glenn.
And like I thought they said there was like 4 or 5 wells on the property or something.
Yeah,
So I don't
like
know
that.
why they couldn't draw from a different well, but that's
Yeah.
beside the point.
And maybe they wanted to help out
Yeah.
Herschel.
Yeah.
Be in assistance, again, with the tension between the families and the
Yeah.
guns and all that stuff.
So we have Shane and Andrea, and they're continuing to bond. There's not much to say about them in this episode, but you can like kind of sense them connecting in episode 6. There's a lot of things from this that come back up in episode 6, which is very interesting. And then we have Glenn and Maggie, and they do a run into town to the pharmacy that they revisit in episode 6. And here, I had already sensed some like sexual tension between them and Glenn being interested in her. But then things escalated quicker than I thought they would, and then they hook up in the pharmacy. What did you think of that?
It's interesting, and the assertive one is Maggie, and Glenn becomes his self-confidence isn't there. After they hook up, he's like, was it okay? Was it good? And I think that's an interesting part of Glenn's character is, he doesn't feel confident as a person in his identity. But what we end up seeing throughout these episodes is Glenn is trying to find out who he is.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And, she says it's like a one-time thing, but I think all the viewers are like, yeah, it's going to continue.
Right, absolutely.
And spoiler alert, it does. So the funny thing about these episodes is that like the whole Sophia search is just kind of like dragging on, in my opinion. And like I'm kind of getting tired of it. I just want them to find her or she dies. Like I can't believe they're dragging it out this long.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting element in this. The name of this episode 4, is Cherokee Rose, which is a story that Daryl told to Carol about a Cherokee rose blooming as a sign of hope for the mothers of the Trail of Tears. And so this, as a symbol of hope amidst some, really hard times. And so there's somewhat of a mirror here between those struggling on the Trail of Tears in this group, and Carol, in this case, trying to hold out hope for her daughter, Sophia. So, it's an interesting element. I think that's probably one of the coolest scenes and the coolest writings was to use this story of the Cherokee Rose.
Yeah, I liked it. And I thought it was like showing a softer side of Daryl by giving Carol the flower.
Yeah, I mean, and with meaning, with symbolism, and then this comes back around again, and in other episodes where Carol returns the favor.
Yeah.
Right, and so there's something really cool and a friendship, companionship happening here that we hope we'll see more of in the other episodes.
In this episode, Daryl's the only one looking for Sophia. It's like every episode there's like 1 or 2 people looking for Sophia. It's kind of like the D plot. You have A, B, C, and then the Sophia plot is like the D.
Yeah, this is interesting, though. Daryl, out of all the characters, is the one who is most compassionate, at least it seems like, in this dark time. He's showing something of what humanity can be. going out in love to find the lost one. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool story.
Yeah. So Herschel, he says he's going to let the group stay with them for the time being. But then in later episodes, he's kind of like being like, "Oh, you guys, I assume you'll be moving on
soon." Yeah. There's some interesting clash of ideals and ideologies in these episodes between Herschel and Rick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the very end, we find out Lori is pregnant, and this changes everything. Even it was kind of weird how she got the results right away, but that's beside the point. Once she told like Glenn she needed something, I was like, yeah, she's pregnant. That's just what my mind jumped to. And spoiler alert, she is.
Absolutely. That is again, it creates another interesting plot point. What is Lori going to do? Have a baby in the midst of the apocalypse? Interesting.
So this episode, I don't hate the episode. I probably give like a 7.
Yeah, I would say 7 or so. There's so much character development here. There is a lot of things beginning to emerge that we'll see in episodes 6. It's a setup.
Yeah, this was a setup, yeah, which isn't a bad thing.
No, but it was a lot of important threads beginning here. So.
Yeah. So moving on to episode 5, we have Chupacabra, and it says, in the woods alone, Daryl finds a clue but is injured and attacked by walkers. Rick questions his choices, and Glenn gets mixed signals from Maggie. So this was a good one. We start off with a flashback to the night of the big zombie breakout. We get to see Ed, again, unfortunately, be the worst. And we have, they see the town being bombed, and we have Shane comforting Lori. And it was a pretty well done scene, I thought. Like a good flashback.
Yeah. You see Ed, or Carol wanting to give out food, and Ed said, no, that's our food. And so Carol had to basically tell a little lie. Well, I guess we left it back. So that's really hard. You see the heart of Carol, and you see how much the oppressive nature of Ed in that scene. You also see Shane and Lori developing closer bonds in that little flashback. And
they kind of bring up Ed indirectly later in the episode with that scene between Daryl and Carol. So, and that was kind of like interesting, and we'll talk about that later. But we have Lori, and she asks Glenn to keep her pregnancy a secret. There's not much about her pregnancy in this episode. It's mostly next episode. But we do have more people searching for Sophia in this episode, which is a good thing. And we have Rick and Shane, and they have a conversation, and there hasn't been much between them this season. They haven't not focused on that friendship that much. But then we have this big talk that kind of starts with them joking about which girls they slept with in high school, and then it kind of turns dark.
Yeah, and so the argument goes over, should all this manpower and energy be used to find Sophia? And Shane thinks, no, we got to protect our group, and we're wasting resources, and so there's a conflict of philosophy or ideology here. Shane's at war. That's how he views himself. And if he was leading a group, they'd be protecting themselves and arming themselves in war. And Rick's the compassionate one. But then there's some second guessing going on here. Rick's like, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. So you can see the influence that Shane has over Rick.
Yeah. We also have Herschel. And this is the episode where Herschel kind of starts to get like a bit mean. And he is getting annoyed with the group because, Daryl takes a horse. And then he's also annoyed that Glenn and Maggie are getting closer. So this kind of, because last episode, or in episode 4, we had Herschel like showing compassion for the group by letting them stay here. And in this episode, that kind of like flips a bit, and he's starting to think the opposite of them.
Yeah, and then we have Daryl, when he was out trying to find Sophia, he falls down this massive cliff. Yeah, twice. He's injured. He ends up with a crossbow bolt, through his side, and
he rolled.
It's a big mess. Yeah. And then when he wakes up, there's 2 walkers. He has to kill them in unusual ways, and then he begins to hallucinate. And who does he see?
It's Merle, and I was shocked that Merle was not back fully, but like I was still surprised, and I don't really like Merle, but I thought it kind of gives another layer to Daryl's character, because we haven't seen Merle since he's still missing, and
Right.
it was interesting because Merle's like, "You're not looking for me, instead you're looking for Sophia," like, and that is interesting for Daryl, like, and how he probably never forgot about Merle, but we kind of forgot about Merle a little bit. And it kind of reminds us that, like, oh yeah, like, Merle is still missing, and how is Daryl processing this on top of everything?
Yeah, and then
Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure there's some guilt there
mm-hmm.
because he is searching for Sophia, and they gave up on Merle, even though it was in the city, it was in Atlanta, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of other things at stake, riskier things.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, Merle's indirectly encouraging Daryl to get up the side of the cliff, which is super interesting. And he's doing it. And you can see a little bit of the brotherly bickering that took place when they were growing up. You can kind of see how Merle treated his younger brother Daryl. But at the end of the day, Daryl gets up the side of the cliff due to Merle's motivation.
It was tough love, but I think it made me respect Merle a little bit to see how he does really care about Daryl, even though he doesn't always show it the best way.
Mm-hmm.
But you can tell that they're brothers, like the way that they interact, and then they have like visual similarities too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering. I'm sure Merle is going to be like back at some point in the show. So I'm looking forward to whenever that happens. Another cool thing about when he was out in the woods is that they shot it so like when he shot the guy with the crossbow, it landed like right in front of us on screen, and that was a cool shot.
That was a cool shot. Yeah, I like that.
So then we have. So Rick is starting to doubt himself, and tells Lori, I think, that maybe he's like thinking a way that like doesn't make sense anymore, and maybe he has to start thinking differently about the group and where they're headed, and Shane kind of gets into his head.
Yes, absolutely.
And Lori is upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
But then but then a little bit later, when Daryl comes back, we have like they find the doll, and his faith and hope comes back for the search, and he's like, he was able to find a doll, so I say we continue the search.
Right.
And Shane's still upset and very against that. And then Lori confronts Shane, and he's like, the only thing I care about are you and Carl. And Lori says, like, me and Carl are not your problem anymore. So we have confirmation that Shane doesn't care about Rick.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shane's trying to insert, his influence, basically to take leadership of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with the possibility, based on a former episode when, he had Rick in his gun sight, of offing Rick somehow. So he could take over the whole group and have Lori and Carl back. Or somehow take Lori and Carl and leave. Because at one point he was thinking of leaving himself. I'm sure he would want to do that.
Yeah. So we have Daryl. He does make it back, and then Andrea is taking Dale's job up on top of the camper and be on a lookout with the rifle. And we have Daryl coming back looking very injured and not looking very good. And Andrea sees him from the distance, and they run out, and they don't shoot him, obviously, because they know it's Daryl. And then Andrea shoots him from like far away. What did you think of that?
This is a very interesting scene. So Daryl's acting like a zombie, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not intentionally. He's walking like a zombie because he's injured.
Yeah.
And so from a distance, he does not look human, right? And so Andrea is, in her mind, you kill the non-human, you kill the zombie. So that's what's on her radar there. And, there's a lot, we talked about this, off the podcast, we were just talking about how Andrea wants to be affirmed as someone who doesn't have to do laundry, but can hang out with the guys. And so here we have a situation I find interesting of Daryl's humanity here, and Andrea's assertiveness to kill the zombie to get cred.
But she didn't listen to.
No, and she didn't listen to the group, the ones who were saying, "Hey, don't shoot."
Yeah, and she did. And if the guys there weren't doing anything up close, then she should have known.
Right, she should have.
But she wanted to get the credit.
Yep.
So, and this sets up next episode too. But yeah, I was pretty annoyed with that, like her choices. So then we have Daryl, and he is injured and now laying in bed, and we have Carol coming in, kind of like a flip from what happened last episode where he came into her. And she thanks him for finding the doll and for searching for Sophia, and she says, "You did more for Sophia than her dad did her whole life." And we kind of saw how Ed was like a jerk and not a good father and not a good person at the beginning of this episode as a reminder. And then we cut to this ending where like Daryl is not like a father figure to Sophia, but like he's doing more for her, and Carol really appreciates
demonstrating
that.
love and compassion, being a true human, even though he was just a few minutes before, in the episode, he was walking like a zombie. He was, not a human being, but in reality, he did more for Sophia than really anybody.
Anyone
In the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then there's a comment that Carol makes, which I really love. She says, "You're just as much of a leader of the group as Rick and Shane." And so I would imagine Daryl feels so much better about himself, especially when in his mind, his hallucinations, Merle said some pretty negative things about Daryl.
Yeah, he doesn't think highly of himself at all.
Right.
So it was nice that that cheered his spirits a bit, and I appreciate Carol doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, like kind of like a flip from how Daryl cheered Carol up last episode, and now Carol cheered Daryl up this episode.
Yeah, great.
So yeah, the ending, we have Glenn and Maggie, and they're pretty much going to hook up in the barn, but then Glenn finds walkers. I was shocked. But I figured something, because they mentioned something about like, you can't stay in the barn or something. They made like a few references to the barn, and I'm like, what's going on in the barn? And then now we know that there's walkers in the barn.
Yeah, and so poses a moral, complex question is, what do you do with those who are infected? Herschel believes that they're sick and they could be cured. And, of course, Rick and gang believe that they're monsters and they need to be put down. And so Glenn is thrown in the midst of it, and of course, Maggie's like, you can keep the secret, which, of course, is the name of the next episode. So
yeah, so this episode I would give it was like probably a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I would say 8, 9 out of 10,
Yeah.
something like that. I think it was a great episode.
Okay, let's get on to season 2, episode 6, titled Secrets. And it says, Glenn tries to keep 2 secrets. Andrea discovers a new skill and is forced to put it to the test. Rick learns something about someone close to him. And this was my favorite of the 3. There was a lot going on in it, and a lot of character development for especially 2 characters that we'll talk about. But we start off with this scene with Otis's wife, and she feeds chickens to the walkers. And I only bring it up because you can tell like they still want to they want to take care of the walkers. They have that family. They have hope for these walkers.
Yeah, they're treating them like human beings.
them.
They're feeding them.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting because all the episodes up until this, we've seen them as monsters. And here you have another group of people treating them as somebody who's sick and they need to be fed and cared for. That kind of blows my mind, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So we have one scene with Daryl in this episode, and it's Andrea apologizing to him for what she did. And he's like, oh, it's cool. Like, I don't really care. And I thought, like, she should have faced more consequences for what she did. She should have had her gun taken away again or something. Like, I just thought it was weird how, like, it was just all, like, okay, and that he would be fine with that. It was just kind of weird to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
So we have Glenn, and we find out he's the worst secret keeper. Like, he tells
my goodness.
Dale...
He is the worst.
He tells Dale there's walkers in the barn and Lori is pregnant, which I'm glad he told them. I don't because secrets being kept can definitely drag out. So it did advance the plot, and Dale was a good choice because he handled the confrontations pretty well in this episode, and we'll talk about that of how Dale was a highlight of this episode in particular. But we have this kind of conflict because Carl wants to learn how to shoot a gun, and Lori does not want him because he just got shot, and Rick thinks it's good for him to learn how to shoot because of obviously the situation. Do you have any thoughts on this conflict between them?
Well, again, it gets there. There's at the heart of this particular episode. There's a lot of conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Different sides and perspectives on so many things, and yeah, I mean, Carl was just shot, and he is transitioning from a child to a man very quickly because of the stress and trauma that he's experienced. He's thrust into a situation that is far beyond a typical child's environment.
Yeah.
And so he's growing up, whether Lori thinks he is or not, and she is trying to protect him. Rick's like, you know what, we need to treat him like a man.
Yep. So we have Dale. He confronts Herschel about the walkers in the barn, and Herschel's trying to say like he reveals that his wife and stepson are in the barn, and Dale is trying to say like they're dangerous, like he's seen what they've done to people, and it's not safe for anyone for them to have them there. And Herschel just he won't like he I don't know, he's very like adamant that like they're people.
Yeah, so we see Dale, and I think he's awesome in this episode, doing several confrontations.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dale asserts a leadership. As I was sharing with you when we watched the episode, you know, he's a peacemaker. He's trying to solve the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Where a lot of people, you know, find out something and they keep it to themselves and just let nature take its course. You know, Dale's trying to, like, you know, fix things. Mm-hmm. And he shares his opinion on several issues. And I think it's really, really cool, Dale's role in this episode.
For sure. Not much Herschel in this episode, but he does say like he just assumes they're going to be moving on.
Yep.
The group.
Absolutely.
So let's see. We have a lot of Shane and Andrea stuff in this episode, and we have Andrea wants to continue to learn how to use a gun, which I feel like is not a good idea after what happened last episode. But she wants to get better at it and train, and we find out she's actually pretty good with a gun. I mean, obviously, if she was able to shoot Daryl from that far away, she has good aim, you know.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is they're going to find Sophia. There's a subdivision that they didn't explore, and so they were going there. And what we see is Shane is really pushing Andrea to be able to defend herself, to put down walkers, fire the gun in the midst of stress and anxiety. And so the best lesson, of course, is, you know, to get thrust into it, and that's what happens. And believe it or not, Andrea is able to prove herself.
Yeah, he brings up Amy, which upsets her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was a low blow.
But that's, you know, Shane unraveling more.
Yeah. And then they go off. Yeah, they face against some walkers, and Andrea has I think a pretty good moment where like she faces her fears and she shoots them. But like she kind of like you can see like the difference between what she did here and then what she did last episode with shooting Daryl, and you can tell like some development with her, which I did appreciate. And then we have, so Shane and Andrea, they hook up, and I knew this was coming from episode 1. So I'm assuming it's just like a one-time thing. I think they're both really unpredictable characters, so I doubt it's going to be like a permanent thing. But maybe I'll be surprised. But what did you think of them hooking up?
Yeah, they're a lot alike in many ways, personality-wise, and their brokenness, trauma. You know, they're both a mess, and they were able to together, you know, do something productive in that subdivision, search for Sophia. They didn't find her, so they both kind of had this, you know, we survived, we did well. Andrea proved herself. Shane was able to be the coach or the mentor. And so, yeah, on the way back to the camp, they hook up and I agree. It's probably a one-time thing. I don't remember what happens to these two characters, but yeah, they're both a mess.
Yeah. So we have Dale. He gives advice to Lori, and another good scene. Like he helps her. Not much to say about that, but again, just shows how Dale really cares about her and cares about almost everyone in this camp except one person, which we'll talk about later. So we have Lori asks Glenn to go on another run for her, so him and Maggie go, and she's upset because he told Dale about it. So they go in, and you can tell something's going to happen because it's another one of those scenes that like they're literally just looking through stuff, and it was kind of like oddly shot. And then a walker grabs her, and Glenn saves her from it, and I thought that was a pretty good scene.
Yeah, and the what they were going to get was some abortion pills or whatever you want to call them in the
morning
sense
after
the morning
pills,
after pills,
yeah.
just so Lori could lose the baby. And the issue is Maggie, as soon as she saw what it was, kind of flipped out.
Yeah.
She was really hurt that the group, especially Lori, sent Glenn to get this. And so, again, Glenn is kind of the gopher, the guinea pig. The guy goes down the well, the guy who risks himself over and over again, and Maggie's just ticked.
Yeah. She just flipped out on Lori.
Yep.
And then we have where Maggie tells Glenn that, like, you're being used as bait, like, with the well and then being sent into town and all of this. And, like, they need to treat you better and you deserve more than this. Which I thought was a good point, and I think this is a good setup for Glenn's character to maybe stand up for himself at one point.
Yeah, I mean, if you put yourself in that situation, Maggie is reminding Glenn who he is. He has value. He is loved. He's cared for. He should be, human. He should be treated well. And the group is treating him kind of like, gopher, risking his life over and over and over again for things that should be others participating in.
Yeah. So we have Glenn, and he tells Lori that she shouldn't have to make the decision about the baby alone. And that was a good scene. I liked what he said. I liked him looking out for her. I think he has his immature moments, but I do think he's kind of coming into his own. And I like how his character's really developed this season. And it's true, Lori should not have to make this alone. That is a very hard decision. I mean, especially in their current situation, but even in a normal situation, that's a very hard decision to make, to keep the baby or not. But before we get to that final scene, we have this very intense confrontation between Shane and Dale. And Shane and Andrea, they come back into camp, and Dale's like, okay, something happened between them. You could just tell. So he takes Shane inside, and he's like, I think you need to leave. And Shane's getting annoyed with, like, how Dale is, like, confronting him, and, he's like, he talks about, like, that night, because Dale brings Otis up, and, he's like, I think you need to show some gratitude, because Carl lived that night because of what I did. And then Dale brings up, like, the time that he pulled his gun on Rick. And I've been waiting for him to bring that up, because they made a point with Dale being the one to see that last season. So he finally brought it up, and this is when you can just see, like, the actor of Shane, like, you can tell, like, he spirals and he turns dark, and he says, like, no, Rick's my best friend, I would never do that to him. And he says, like, if you think I would do that to my best friend, what would I do? Is just some guy I don't even like. And I was like, ooh, what a threat.
Yeah, and Dale is you can definitely sense a little scared there in that moment. But again, Dale is the man here. He confronts the tension with Herschel. He tells Lori, the situation with the pregnancy. He gives some advice. And then he goes to Shane. 3 big confrontations in this episode. Dale's leadership, maybe not like Rick or Shane or even Daryl, but Dale's a leader.
Yeah, he is.
And he's a strong leader, looking out for the betterment of the group. In this case, he sees Shane as a cancer. So the best thing to do is ask Shane to leave.
Yeah.
But Shane, he's unraveling at just a very rapid pace. So we know that there's something deeper, darker happening. And Dale's able to have some discernment to say, I think this thing that happened with Otis isn't what you're really saying. Yeah. And so Dale's definitely seeing things that others are not seeing.
Very good scene, though.
Yeah, excellent.
That was my favorite of the episode.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah. So the final scene is Rick finds the morning after pills because Lori spit them out. And he confronts her, and he's really upset. He flips off, and we have not seen him flip off like this before. He's usually pretty calm, like pretty reasonable person, but here he flips off, and he's upset. And Lori doesn't want to bring the baby into the world and live a short, cruel life, she says. And Rick's upset that she could even think that way. And he's kind of confused, like, why wouldn't she tell him about the baby? And then he asks, is there anything else you need to tell me? And Lori says that her and Shane hooked up. And Rick says he already knew. And he's like, it's okay because you thought I was dead. And that's kind of the end. And so I guess the baby is Rick's, confirmed, because she tells Dale that earlier in the episode. Now, is she lying? Or does she seriously not know? I don't know.
Well, just to throw a different spin on it, I think the reason why she is not telling Rick is because it's really Shane's.
I just feel like it's got to be Shane's.
Yeah. So and she's covering.
Yeah.
By making the decision whether or not to keep the baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, we find out here that Rick knew, just intuition that they got together, and so he's kind of working through all this. She's working through all this. It's quite a powerful, emotional ending to this episode.
Yeah, this episode was good. I would give it like a 9.5.
Yeah,
I think this is a perfect episode of this show because there's some action, but a lot of good character development, especially for Dale and Glenn in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I would give it a 9.5 or maybe even a 10. I thought it was a great episode.
Great episode.
And I will say that the title of the episode and the thread that kind of weaves through it is Secrets. Mm-hmm. And we see the destructiveness of secrets when they're held on to by themselves, and we hold on to them. It can do some damage inside, and we see when they're revealed, they can do damage also. But Dale handled everything appropriately, and confronts people with those secrets that come out, and he's trying to knit things together to keep the group together. And I just admire that. I think his character in this episode was what made it.
For sure. So that's going to be it, but we'll be back next week to talk about episodes 7 through 9. So thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you guys.
Bye everyone.
Yep.